This is Erin Blaze. Welcome to The Truth About Real Estate. Today we're going to talk about the homebuyer tax credit. My guest is Steve Shirey, a CPA.
Good evening, Erin.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
I just wanted to talk about one statistic, particular to Columbia, Missouri. So far this year we've had 2,017 home sales. 469 of those were to first-time buyers, so 23% of our home sales this year have been to first-time home buyers. Now that the tax credit has been expanded, it'll be interesting to see the impact on the market. Could you tell us a little bit about how the new expanded tax credit will work?
It's going to work a lot like the most recent tax credit program, only it's a little bigger and a little better. The main difference between the older tax credit program and the new tax credit program is a provision for existing homeowners. If you own a home now or owned a home any 5 out of the last 8 years, you can use that program and you can get $6,500 in tax credit.
Okay, is there any kind of an income limit for the buyers, or has it
yes.
changed?
The income limit has changed. It's actually increased. I'm going to refer to some notes here. Okay, here we go. The older program, you had a $75,000 limit for single people, $150,000 for married people, and that's for the full credit. If you had income in the next $20,000 range, you'd get a partial credit. Now, the newest program, that limit is $125,000 for single, $225,000 for married, and you've still got the $20,000 phase-out period, which if you have more than the initial limit, you get a partial credit.
Okay, so I was kind of confused about how you figure the partial credit. Do you, it says it's an additional $20,000 phase-out, so that means you wouldn't get anything if you made $145,000.
As a single person with $145,000, you wouldn't get any credit. And as a married couple with $245,000, you wouldn't get any credit.
Okay, but if you make a little bit over the 125, how would you figure the partial credit?
Well, that is going to be on the IRS forms, and they'll probably have a table for it.
Okay, all right. And I looked at the IRS form. This was the form, first-time homebuyer credit 5405. This is the form, and it only has 6 questions on it, but it has 3 pages of explanation on how you're supposed to fill this out. And one thing that I thought was confusing is it said here, if you die, repayment of the credit's not required, so that's good. But if you filed a joint return and then you die, your surviving spouse would be required to repay his or her half of the credit.
Yeah, that's probably only if they move out of the house. I guess they're assuming that if your spouse dies, you'll either want to move or won't be able to manage staying in the house by yourself.
Okay, so then if you move within the 3 years because of that reason, you just have to pay back your half.
Yeah, not the other half for the person that died, because theirs is gone.
Right, okay, all right, well that clarifies that. The other thing it says on this form that I couldn't figure out is it said that you're supposed to enter your modified adjusted gross income. What do they mean by that?
Well, that's going to be in the instructions, those 3 pages of instructions that you talked about. There's probably a table in there. There's a line on your Form 1040 that's your adjusted gross income, but then for tax credit purposes, you would add and subtract a few things to get to that modified adjusted gross income.
Okay, so the thing to do would be then to read it thoroughly.
Yes.
And follow the directions so you can figure it.
Line by line, just kind of go down through the instructions and document your computations and keep them with your copy of the return, because it'll come back to haunt you if you don't.
Okay. Now, what would be the minimum age then that somebody could get this credit? Because I know there's been people saying, oh, it's, you know, some people have given the credit to a 2-year-old, but that doesn't make any sense.
Well, there wasn't an age limit on the old tax credit. There also wasn't a fraud detection provision. You didn't have to provide any documentation at all under the first two tax credits. You got to remember that we're in the third version of the tax credit program. But the current program, you have to be 18 to buy the house, and you have to attach a copy of the closing statement to your tax return.
Okay, so the closing statement proves that you purchased the house.
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's good.
And that would be, of course, like everything else, subject to verification.
Right. Okay. Is there a maximum house price?
Yeah, for the first time, $800,000, and that's an absolute limit. You don't get a partial credit for buying an $805,000 house. So you got to be careful about that.
Okay. And what types of houses can it be used for?
Any personal residence can be included, whether it's a condo or a co-op or, you know, a detached or single family home or even an attached home like the zero lot line homes.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. Another thing that was confusing is sometimes people will say, well, I won't be able to get that because I don't owe any taxes. But this is a refundable credit. Can
Absolutely.
you explain that?
A refundable credit means you get the money. If you owe taxes, a refundable credit can be used against those taxes. If the credit is more than the taxes, you get the rest of it back in the form of a refund. If you didn't owe any taxes, you'd get the whole tax credit as a refund.
Okay. And is there any case that you would have to pay it back?
Several cases that you would have to pay it back if you move out of the house or if you sell it within the first 3 years. And that's for most people. If you're military, you get an extra year. If you're in certain federal employment, and that would be the intelligence people and diplomatic people. If you are required to move by orders of the federal government, you don't have to pay back the credit.
Okay, all right, well, that's good. I'm kind of curious about the theory behind this just because this is the first time I've ever seen tax credits. What kind of an impact do you think it makes? Well, the National Association of Realtors states that the impact of the 1.4 million people getting this credit is there's a positive impact of additional $2 billion in the economy. Do you think that's true?
I'd say that's a minimum, because one of the things that was happening as we were going into this severe recession last year is that the construction industry came to a virtual standstill, and that's single family and commercial, both. As soon as the tax credits were announced, there were people interested in the market again.
That's true. And that reminds me of something in the Columbia market that's been kind of interesting. Actually, we've seen an increase this year compared to last year in our sales. For example, our sold homes for July of this year were 211. Last July, they were 182. So that's a big increase. However, new construction was down, 19 new homes sold, compared to last year, 23. But that's part of what you're talking about in the market.
Yeah.
There were we've only had 161 new homes come on the market this year, whereas last year we had 375. If it's not on the market, you can't buy it.
That's right. And the thing about construction stopping completely is that there isn't anything getting built, so nobody's to buy it.
Yeah, that's true. People are still saying that they think things are slow. They're not as busy as we'd like them to be. However, from the data I've seen, pending home sales, it's showing that we've had an increase every month for the last 9 months in a row.
Yes.
And that's the first time we've had an increase every month for 9 months since 2001. What do you think the expansion of the tax credit will do?
Well, it'll do a couple of things. It will keep things moving in the real estate industry, but one of the things that was happening, you remember last August, September, the news was that you needed to get your home under contract so you could close within the deadline, because that tax credit plan was phasing out. And it was that sense of urgency that kind of motivated Congress to extend the thing, because there was a big crush of people trying to beat the deadline.
Right.
And the banks were backed up, and they couldn't guarantee that they could close all the loans in time. And that's a key question. That deadline, for all of your deadlines, are based on your closing date. You have to, except for next year's phase out, you have, if you get a house under contract by April 30, you can close it anytime between then and June 30 and still get your credit. But if something happens and you miss that June 30 deadline, you lose the credit.
Yeah, and that would be bad because it's an absolute deadline.
Yes.
And that brings up something else. Because there's been more buyers in the market, we've had, and maybe you can explain these home price indexes, because I've never heard of them before, but it says that we've had 3% price growth each quarter for the past 2 quarters, and they're showing that the people that keep these is S&P and Case-Shiller. Can you explain S&P or Case-Shiller?
Case-Shiller was the first technical index to be created for market prices of homes over the United States. And they try to get an indication of change in sale price for the same or very comparable homes year by year and month by month. And they try to track the trend. And there are a lot of people interested in that, of course. Your relocation companies, your big corporate entities that move people all the time, they need to know what's happening with real estate prices. If I move somebody to Cleveland, is it going to cost me more or less than it would cost to move them to Des Moines? And Case-Shiller was the first effort to do that, and of course they're the most established. They have the best data. Okay.
Well, our prices have gone down slightly, our median house prices, and actually Carol Van Gorp, who's the CEO of our Board of Realtors, believes it's because we've had so many first-time buyers and fewer new construction homes, which tend to be more expensive. Our price actually has gone down from $152,200 in 2008 to $150,000, which is now our median price in 2009. But another thing that's kind of interesting is the interest rates. According to Freddie Mac, last week we had a 4.83% interest rate for a 30-year loan, and that's like the third lowest since 1971.
Wow.
And, well, here's a question I have. It says the Federal Reserve is not going to buy mortgage-backed securities after March. So what's going to happen then?
They're hoping that the private market will be sufficiently stabilized that they don't have to do that anymore. Their intervention in the market was on an emergency basis. It's not a normal thing.
Okay, well, who normally buys these?
Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, private investors like the big banks, insurance companies. Some of your venture capital companies get into the more risky pools, and those people all got in trouble last year, so the Federal Reserve System jumped in to try to stabilize things temporarily.
Okay. Well, I was just curious about that because I've heard that makes the rates go up because a private investor is going to want more of a return in order to buy these things. In order for them to be more attractive, the rate has to go up.
Remember that the rate that the private investor is going to get on this package of mortgages depends somewhat on the price he pays for the package. If you have $1 million of loans at 4 3/8%, and your investor wants 5.5%, he's only going to offer you $900-some thousand for that $1 million worth of mortgages, because that's what gets him to his 5.5% rate.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's just one of those things.
Okay. Well, some people in Columbia also got kind of a double bonus because we have a home ownership grant for people
Yes.
in the city of Columbia. Of the 469 first-time home buyers, and when I say first-time home buyers, in the city of Columbia, that means you haven't owned a house in the last 3 years. But out of those 469, 56 were able to also get a grant from the city. There were additional 17 people that did not get the grant for one reason or another, and I don't know what the reason is. But do you have an opinion about how these homeownership grants work?
Oh, I really like them. They allow the city to do some social things that they couldn't do otherwise. That lets them move people back into neighborhoods that they couldn't afford otherwise. It allows neighborhoods to get fixed up and cleaned up. It's done quite a bit for the north side in Columbia.
Do you have anything like that in Jefferson City?
We do not. The city and Habitat for Humanity do quite a bit of rehab business, but there's nothing targeted for private individuals.
Okay. Well, we also have Habitat. But one thing that's kind of interesting about this, or maybe not so much interesting, but when you get this grant, you're locked into staying in the house for a certain amount of time. If you get $5,000, you're locked into staying there for 5 years. But if you get more than $5,000, anywhere from $5,001 up to $10,000, then you're locked into living there for 10 years.
Okay.
If you don't live there for 10 years, then you have to pay back part of the credit, and it's prorated, which is different from the federal plan where you have to pay the whole thing back.
Yeah. Well, and then, again, the federal payback thing is strictly for the most recent program. You know, the 3-year all or nothing payback. The first program, the $7,500 program, which was 2008, that was actually a loan. You had to everybody had to repay that over 15 years. The second one was more like this $8,000 credit, where you had a time period to live in the house. As long as you met that time period, you didn't have a payback.
Okay. What else did you bring here? Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you wanted to bring up?
Well, we've got the National Association of Realtors existing homes, and that's for the whole United States. And they had some charts that weren't big enough, again, to show on TV, but the months on the market, the number of, you know, they know how many homes sell a month, and they know how many homes on the market. So you divide the number of homes sold per month by the number of homes on the market, and that's how many months it would take to sell them all if there weren't any new ones coming on the market, okay? At the beginning of the year, actually, well, at the beginning of 2009, that was at 9.7 months on the market. That's an overall thing. The highest on the market was November 2008, when we had 11 months supply of homes on the market. That's across the whole United States. As of October 2009, that was down to 7%, so that's quite a big change. And the sales price has also fallen. And again, probably because of the influence of first-time, lower-priced homes. 2008, October, it was $293,500. First year, January 2009, it was down to $256,200. Again, that was when we had our peak on the market, but by October this year, it was back up to $267,200 for your average sale price of an existing home. So, you know, you've got improvement in the market on several measures because of this, primarily because of this program, because there's nothing else that's changed that I can think of.
Yeah, I don't think anything else has changed. Let's see, there was talk, and maybe you know something about this because you work for the state, there was talk about giving some certain people a credit for their property taxes when they're a first-time buyer.
Yes, there have been a number of pieces of legislation introduced. One of them would have provided a home buyer tax credit similar to the federal program. It did not go very far, but it was introduced. And then there are already several programs that provide partial reimbursement of property taxes for senior citizens and handicapped citizens. That's been in Missouri law for a long time.
Okay.
It's a circuit breaker program, they call it.
Okay, so right now it's primarily for people that are elderly or disabled, but I guess there's a possibility they would expand it.
There's always a possibility that they would expand it. It's a rather complicated formula, and it requires a computer simulation every time they try to change the program. So predicting what's going to happen with it gets kind of complicated.
Okay, so each time they think about possibly changing it, they have to run some kind of a model to see what the outcome would be?
Yes, because every red cent of a government's revenue comes from a taxpayer. That's just a given. You know, they get money, it's come from somebody. If they're going to give somebody a break like this federal program, $8,000 per home buyer, that costs the federal government $8,000 in income tax revenue that they would have had otherwise.
Right, okay. Well, do you think that they will extend this program?
I think they will. They may have to cut it back because at some point they're going to decide that the industry is stabilized. The construction industry and the home sales industry are stabilized enough that this is really not needed anymore, and the urgency of doing something about the federal deficit is going to make them reconsider the program.
Okay, yeah, the deficit's going to be there.
Yes.
All right. Now on I guess there was a couple of questions I forgot to ask you about the repeat home.
Oh, yes.
Repeat home buyers. Is that $6,500 an absolute credit, or does it depend on the home price?
Again, that has the same $800,000 maximum.
Okay.
It's $3,250 per person if they're married and filing separate. The person has to have lived in a home for 5 of the previous 8 years. And once they do that, they're in. I mean, there aren't any separate phase-ins for this program.
Okay.
It's quite a bit similar to the first-time buyer program, except that it's $1,500 less, and they have to have owned a home before.
Right, okay. So then, in order to get it, you would probably not only have to bring in your HUD showing that you purchased a home, but also your HUD showing that you sold a home?
Yes.
So do you have to sell the house, or could you turn it into a rental?
I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
I couldn't figure that out from the form. The other thing I couldn't figure out is it said that if your house is lost, such as by being destroyed in the 3 years, and you don't buy another house, that you would still have to pay that back.
Ooh.
And that seems weird, because I was thinking, what if you were living in your house and then the highway department said that they were going to come in and condemn your house and take it for the highway, and it was less than 3 years? I guess you'd have to get more money for your house.
Yeah, you have to get more money from your house. That should all be figured into the way you sell your house. You know, if you have a choice in the matter. If your house gets destroyed by a tornado and or you don't rebuild, then you do lose the credit.
Okay.
But if you had insurance on it, you know, you would have money to address that.
Okay, so it would still be considered loss.
Yes.
Okay.
Or if you move out of it and go live someplace else, and you're a normal individual, not subject to the military or federal service exceptions, you move out of the house, you lose the credit.
Right. Okay. So if you're not in the federal service and you don't have to move, which I read is defined as being more than 50 miles away from home for 90 days.
Now that's for a different purpose.
Oh, it is? What's the purpose?
That's for taking a moving expense deduction.
Oh, a moving expense.
Yeah. Yeah, if you move less than 50 miles, you don't get the deduction.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's just the
All
way that
right.
is.
Okay, so you have to move at least 50 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. And the other thing I read was that if you don't have a profit of $6,500, you don't have to pay the credit. And it said that you had to figure your adjusted basis.
Mm-hmm.
What goes into deciding what the adjusted basis is?
Oh, all kinds of things, but first of all, you start with the purchase price of the home. Again, that would be from your HUD statement. And then improvements that you make to the property, like if you add on a swimming pool or put a new kitchen or bathroom or something like that, something that's a definite improvement in the home, that adds to your basis. Things like painting and, power washing the vinyl siding, those don't improve the value of the house, but additions and upgrades do.
Okay, so just the normal maintenance, like putting a roof on it,
Right.
putting in it. What if you put in a new kitchen?
That's an improvement, an upgrade, so yes, you could add that in.
Okay, so improvements only. And does it take into account your cost of selling?
Yes, yes. The form is a little complicated, but you take your sales price and you take your cost of selling out, which is going to include commission and fix-up expenses for the selling, and that gives you a number. And then your adjusted basis, which is your purchase price plus all your improvements, gives you another number. The difference between your adjusted sale price and your adjusted basis is what you have to start figuring your profit or loss on the sale of the property.
Okay, so then that would also include your title fees.
Yes. Yeah.
Those other fees that come in.
Yeah, and you'd have two sets of them. You know, you'd have a set from when you bought the house and a set from when you sell the house, and you have to put them in their respective slots.
Okay, and so the things that you do because you're going to sell your house, now do you get credit for the things that you do before you put it on the market?
Yes, like if you completely repaint the house or you completely change out the carpet because you want your house to sell, quickly and at the best price, that's part of your fix-up cost that you deduct from your sales price.
Okay, and so do you also get credit for the things that you might have done that come up on the inspection, the stuff that gets done between the time it goes under contract and the time it closes?
Yes, everything you have to fix during that sale process comes out of your sale price.
Okay, all right. Well, I've always been confused about what is, what constitutes what you do before the closing, between what's between the contract and the closing and what's before you put it under contract.
Well, that's the trick to this, is understanding the dates involved. There's a time frame when around the time that you put the house on the market and the time you sell it, that normal fix-up, maintenance, cleanup, repair things become deductible from your sale price. Normally, those things are just personal expenses. But during that time frame, you can deduct them from the sales price.
Okay, all right, great. Well, it looks like we're out of time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the show. If you have any questions about any of the dates that we talked about or anything that you would like us to cover on the show in the future, just email me at thetruthaboutrealestate@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you and good night.